Hi, and welcome to Character Campfire Stories. I'm Jim Hardison, co-founder and creative director of Character LLC. Today, I'm delighted to welcome my guest, Lee Susen. Thanks so much for joining me, Lee. Would you mind taking a moment to introduce yourself?
I'm Lee Susen. I'm the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer at Mcllhenny Company, maker of Tabasco. I was thinking today, how many years have I known you? And I think we're coming up on 20.
I don't think I even had a beard back when I met you. I'm not sure that you had a beard when I
Oh,
met you.
I
Yeah.
don't think we could grow beards when we met each other.
Yeah, we both gained beards over the period of time.
I cold called character because I had recently, at that time, had read a book on archetypes, was obsessed with the idea of characters, not realizing the full magic. I didn't even know the question I was going to ask, and certainly the answer to the question that I didn't know I was going to ask. And called thinking character was going to be a great agency and organization to help us better understand archetypes. Boy, was I wrong.
I think that the archetypes are great if you were writing a story that had a super clear cut beginning, middle, and end. Because generally, what happens is you see a character that needs some archetype energy, and so they pass through different archetypes. And each time they learn something more about who they are.
In a movie, generally, to your point, it starts in one place, it ends in another, and we get to watch that full arc. Or if we're reading a book, uh, a brand doesn't have the benefit of the end point. And so that I think, as a steward of brand equity, can be really challenging when you're like, nope. Unfortunately, the consumer isn't necessarily, they're not going to be able to ride this out till the end. This is what's going to pull them into the brand experience. They're going to participate in the struggle with you, versus you're going to resolve the struggle with the consumer.
I think that's like the great model for a brand is we're not here to say we're Gandalf or Obi-Wan Kenobi. We're not the secondary character. We're here to be the window into connecting with yourself in this story.
I agree. I think that frame has helped us a lot, and just the reminder that internal struggle is what is fascinating. Versus, to your point, hey, this is an arc. There was an inciting incident. Now we're at conflict climax, and we're moving towards denouement. You're like, no, 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 no.
When we talk to people about what brand storytelling is like, it's a lot more like writing a television series where you actually don't want to resolve the ultimate conflict because the minute you do, your story is essentially over.
And again, I think the great part is, as we live this, I think that the television analogy helps a lot, because you're preparing for ongoing. This is in perpetuity. The intent is you're working on an ongoing concern for Tabasco. In 156 years that the brand has been around, it's almost transcended from product to brand, truly meaning more than the liquid in the bottle itself. And for us, the challenge has been, well, how do you consistently translate that into meaningful storytelling that can connect, motivate, and inspire the consumer and can really drive that relevance? And I think for a long time, were confusing facts with stories. We were trying to repeat history as story, and certainly have no shortage of things we can talk about. The issue was, is it interesting? The necessity of breaking through in a meaningful way is more important now than it's ever been. And I think it continues as the media landscape becomes fractured and as the competitive landscape becomes far more interesting, and we're global. How do you have these conversations and tell these stories in a way that really engage, knowing that there are endless other ways for consumers to receive some sort of entertainment benefit, and or product benefit or brand benefits.
As you were walking through that, it suddenly occurred to me that if you said, hey, here's the thing, I'm going to give you a TV series that you're going to write for, but you're going to pick it up in season 156.
Yes, exactly. I think it's a great
Yeah.
analogy. Season 156. Here we go. This is the one.
I just want to hit on that point that you said. It's such a good point. The way that you keep the thing going is by getting at what the source of the conflict is. And that's super essential so that you can continue to tell engaging stories, but you can't, in your effort to keep things new and fresh, go somewhere so different that it doesn't feel like it's the same brand anymore.
Yeah. how do you leverage, honor and be inspired by where you've come from as you endeavor to continue to grow into the future? And one of my favorite exercises we did, and we actually borrowed this from Asahi, the Japanese beer, they did a 100-year plan. And so we sat down as a leadership team and said, let's write a 100-year plan for Tabasco. And what was really fun, and this goes to the point you were making on not only longevity, but an eye towards how do you continue to find engaging ways to tell the story, was tell a story that's going to outlive you. We're working on a brand 100 years. That's well beyond our participation, in this business. What do you do? And central to that was meaning. It's easy to get trapped in, well, how are consumers? What are the host foods in, the year 3000? You're like, well, hold on a second here. Yeah, 3000. What business are we in? And it was that unlock of, well, hold on a second. What business are we in today? Why do we do what we do? What's our purpose? Do we actually have meaning? That's a far richer conversation. And that actually allowed for a really interesting conversation about the next 100 years. The form, the problems we were trying to solve became secondary to the fundamental truth of, well, who are we and why do we do what we do as an organization? Where are we going? And then everything else falls into place.
Yeah, it's so easy to lose track of meaning when you're trying to quantify something at that level. You can get lost in like the math of it and not see that there's a big meaningful story underneath it that actually impacts people in an emotional way.
I think that in general, for me at least, is finding a way back to the surface. It's so easy to get caught up in your own way and to get in, deep into, I know that you guys call it the size of the nose, where you're navel gazing and so you're focused on the wrong thing. And how do you get back to almost the honesty of the story you're trying to tell? And the humanity, of the businesses that you're in. And I think story is at the center of all great brands. And I think for the Tabasco brand in particular, unlocking it and figuring out how to effectively communicate and tell that story has been the challenge.
As you've worked to activate story on Tabasco, and as you've worked to activate it on other brands, what are the roadblocks that you run into? Like, what are the hardest parts about activating story?
Yeah, I'd say the trap, and you warn us about this up front, which is when people hear conflict is important, it's the literal interpretation. Well, great, who are we going to go fight? And how quickly a story metaphor reverts to a war metaphor. Or, no, the conflict is the problem we're trying to solve. So we just need to overcome and solve that problem. And all of a sudden you're in the science metaphor. And so getting people comfortable with I was going to call it perpetual motion that conflict creates in a story when you have positive opposites. And, you're pinning yourself, you have a point of view on it, but that perpetual motion, it really just propels you forward into the future. The greatest barrier is internalizing it in a way where you're not fixated on reconciling the problem at hand. You're not fixated on, well, great, now I'm going to manifest the conflict as an existential threat or a literal threat in my competitor and go after it, is where I've seen the greatest challenge. It's really the understanding of how, as a brand, you can create that perpetual motion and tell really interesting stories where the resolution isn't the key to the conflict itself. And that's really challenging. But man, when you get it right, it's powerful.
As you face that challenge, what's been your method of encouraging people to embrace the conflict or really dive into it and use it?
Yeah, I think one is looking at them as positive opposites, which has always helped me. And again, this is something, it's so easy to demonize one side of the conflict. And in doing that, you're creating a strong point of view, but in doing that, it tends to collapse in on good versus bad. And that, I think, binary point of view is what ends up in either war or science versus story. And so how do you embrace and really respect both sides has been probably the most helpful for us, which is to recognize that, both of these, there's something about both of these. And without lowest common denominator and saying, well, we're going to compromise and just land squarely in the center, which is the other thing you can do to neutralize and make the story not interesting, because that's resolution. You're like, we resolve to compromise and now we're done. You're like, nope, you're never done. And so that's been helpful, which is we spend a lot of time talking about the positive opposites, and what it means to have these things pulling us in both directions, and how that tension is not bad, that tension is good. And I think that moment of recognizing it as good, not bad, was and continues to be an unlock. And that not just in this business, but prior businesses as well. There's just that desire to move into problem solving and say, well, I got to fix something.
What's an example of activating or using a brand story that you think worked really well? Either, something you've seen in the world, or preferably something from your own brand.
I always hesitate to, to use ourselves, just because we're on a journey, and I don't want to come across as arrogant and say we've got it all figured out, because we don't. But I'll give one just quick example, which I thought was helpful. And again, without going into too much around, the background of what we've worked on from a Tabasco standpoint. But, as we've identified, there is this great tension between being local and being global, being worldly and being grounded. And it has been true since the very beginning. And we were telling a story recently that Tabasco arrived in the UK before it made it to New York. So it was just easier to leave New Orleans and go to Europe than it was to get up, for whatever reason, in the late 1800s. And without providing, again, too much, we ended up in actually in a war metaphor, tit for tat, through TikTok, of all places. What a great battlefield, TikTok, the battlefield of today. And back and forth, with our key competitor one-upping us, in front of an audience of a gazillion people. And I just want to talk about how the framework was used at this point, which was, of course, yes, there is this direct conflict going on. But when it came down to the authenticity and who we are and how we would participate in this story, one, really looking at it from a story standpoint, and two, balancing, being worldly and being grounded, our checkmate move in this tit for tat was to send a consumer a pepper plant. The competition decided to invite the person out, the consumer out to their global headquarters. Come see our global headquarters. And ours was to reach into who we are, and one of the, I think, core things that separates us, which is the metaphor of the pepper plant being, this thing that ultimately is a symbol for grounded nature, came from Avery Island, and sent out to this consumer. And it was one of these moments where the team working on it is reflecting on the story framework and saying, ignore all of the war metaphor going on. Instead, let's just talk about our struggle, which is, we've got a global headquarters. We have, this piece. But in this moment in time, this feels like an opportunity to really provide a piece of ourselves. It was just one of these great moments where, putting aside that natural desire for, this is how we're going to fight, this is how we're going to win, to this is who we are. This is the meaning. This is what it looks like to be legendary. It was a cool moment.
The confidence to say, hey, we just want to give you a little piece of ourselves. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah. And it was, there are other activations that we've been through, but that one was, I think, right after having sat with you, and actually fundamentally changed the way we thought about the situation we were in.
If you were going to give one piece of advice about using story to engage your audience, what would it be?
Reflecting on this conversation, I'm going to flip it around and say, think television series. I think that honestly, that piece of advice, that you're writing something that is going to have many, many seasons. And don't think of this. It's so easy to think about story as a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think that that's the trap. And that's the collapse in on us versus them. That's the trap into I'm trying to solve this very specific problem for the consumer. It's just not interesting. You're now again in the writer's room working on a story that is going to exist into perpetuity. So think of this as the exercise of these characters, to keep it interesting, what is the struggle and what does that look like? And you're not writing for today. Think about, you're writing this on into the future. And that certainly has helped us. And the beauty of working on brands where the objective is longevity is that you're really writing to make it last.
Excellent. Well, that's an awesome piece of advice. I want to say thanks so much, Lee, for taking the time out to do this. It was really great. First off, it's just always nice to see you, but it was great to get a chance to, talk story with you. So I really appreciate it, and just want to say thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Jim. Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.
Bye.